Hey guys, so this video is largely going to be focusing on conservative Christians and Trump supporters, but I want to note that this is a concept that does not apply to them exclusively. I actually never really considered making a video on this, considering my only philosophy video is very hyper-specific to my content around anti-theism, but I noticed pretty much every comment I've left in response to conservatives recently has included some mention of it. It's becoming increasingly common for conservatives to try and essentially flip the script. Many people, especially queer folks and women, have been cutting off family who voted for Trump, and the overwhelming and pretty much only response I've seen conservatives give to this is some variety of, for being the tolerant left, y'all aren't very tolerant of people with different beliefs. So today I'm gonna break down what the paradox of tolerance is, why I think Trump supporters are relevant to it, and how the current GOP's ties to Christianity are related. So let's just get into it. The paradox of tolerance is the idea that if we extend tolerance to intolerant people or beliefs, we overall risk enabling and creating a society that overall is less tolerant. Essentially, to have a tolerant society, you cannot tolerate intolerance. Let's see how many times I had to record that because it's a tongue twister. The idea was explored by philosopher Karl Popper in his 1945 book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. Popper was a communist and Marxist as a teenager, and worked at a communist headquarters office during this time. However, he became disillusioned with the Marxists at the time due to their desire for violent revolution. And though I couldn't find a specific political party he belonged to, he largely seemed to have sat closer to modern progressive liberals later in life as opposed to Marxism. Popper repeatedly advocated for individual freedoms and what he called an open society. This largely entails the idea that we are always open to improvement as a society and as individuals, to understand and recognize governments and institutions as man-made and worthy of rational criticism, and that modern knowledge is provisional and falsifiable, and as such can and should be challenged rationally. He advocated for religious pluralism, democracy, and the right to denounce or suppress ideas and criticisms that are inherently irrational or contradictory to a tolerant society. Quote, "If we wish to remain human, then there is only one way, the way into the open society, into the unknown, the uncertain, and insecure." While I don't personally agree with all of Popper's criticisms of Marx, notably the focuses on individualism, the idea that we should view our current knowledge, both scientific, social, and governmental, as open to change and notably rational criticism is something I strongly agree with, and the idea that we must learn to be uncomfortable with our insecurity and the unknown is something I've repeatedly advocated for on this channel. Popper was also notably agnostic and rejected organized religion, stating, quote, "I don't know whether God exists or not. Some forms of atheism are arrogant and ignorant and should be rejected, but agnosticism, to admit that we don't know and to search, is all right. When I look at what we call the gift of life, I feel gratitude, which is in tune with some religious ideas of God. However, the moment I even speak of it, I am embarrassed that I may do something wrong to God in talking about God." End quote. Coming back to the topic of tolerance, while Popper was a major voice on the topic, it's been expanded upon by a plethora of philosophers over the years, and is becoming increasingly relevant with the current political climate and values in America. Both the left proper and the Democratic Party have attempted to counter the quote-unquote culture war attitude created by the GOP, evangelical movement, and American conservatives. Running on a platform of tolerance and acceptance has really been the main thing that many of us have found to be the dividing line between the Democratic Party and GOP, especially those of us who are on the economic left who fundamentally have issues with the capitalist ideas held on both sides. However, especially as the election grew closer, and now after it, many Trump supporters have attempted to weaponize this platform of tolerance and acceptance in order to paint Democrats and the left as the problem and as disingenuous. That either we aren't any better than them, but think we are, or that actually we're the problem because we're supposedly too immature to be friends with people who hold different values or beliefs than those within our own group. Trump supporters often paint these differences between parties as disagreements, different beliefs, or just an opinion, and stating that they didn't cut anyone off for voting for Harris or that they have friends who are normal liberals that don't care how they voted. But this brings up the aspect of tolerance and intolerance again. Trump voters fail to see, or are willfully ignoring, the difference between voting differently on issues not involving human rights and those that do. A political disagreement is that I voted to not extend the mayor's term by a year because I think shorter terms will keep him more accountable. However, my partner voted to extend the term because he thought it would be more productive to get things done, and that 1 year isn't really a major difference in accountability. Neither of these things compromise anyone's rights. We simply had a different thought process on what would be most effective. Ultimately, we still both want a responsible politician who's able to do the most good for the people in our city. We just disagree on how that's best achieved. That, however, is not the case when choosing to vote for a politician either because of, or at least in indifference to, claims to want to abolish the Department of Education, support for abortion bans and endorsing politicians like Greg Abbott who pursue them, banning gender-affirming care under government insurance and for minors, or even things not related to policy but rather moral values such as Trump's felony convictions and rape allegations and conviction. When me and my partner vote differently on term limits, we still both want what's best for everyone in our community. We don't agree on how to get there, sure, but that vote is made regardless out of a desire for the best thing for our city. When someone votes to, say, prevent people on insurance such as Medicaid or USAA from accessing transition healthcare, they do not have the overall community's interest in mind. Their vote is made with the intent of making life harder for people that they deem subhuman, unworthy, or fundamentally bad. While many conservatives like to say that it's just a goal to prevent trans healthcare for minors, something that, mind you, is completely unsound scientifically and will not benefit said minors anyway, that is both untrue and still not in line with the best interests of everyone. They openly and willfully state that they view transness as a disease, and a contagious one at that. As much as you scream it's for the children, they still reject studies showing extremely low rates of transition regret, which medical intervention is actually available to minors in the first place, the research showing the positive effects of gender-affirming care, and don't actually just extend that thought to children regardless. Trump, not Project 2025, not anyone Trump has endorsed, mind you, but Trump himself has stated that he intends to place a federal ban on government funding of trans healthcare. This means that grown adults who rely on Medicaid or Medicare, who are active duty military or receive VA benefits, or who are incarcerated will be unable to access HRT, surgeries, or possibly gender therapy. Essentially, this is not a disagreement in politics. It's favoring their own personal, often religiously motivated, values over the well-being and rights of other citizens who their values don't align with. The whole concept of the tolerance paradox and this argument as a whole really boils down to the phrase, "Your right to swing your fist ends at the tip of my nose." They have a right to believe what they choose, even if it's stupid and ignorant and we're allowed to call it as such, but they do not have a right to force those beliefs on others. And their attempt to do so, to swing their fist directly into my and others' faces, is what makes that line between it's just a different opinion and intolerance that in turn should not be tolerated. When we feed into and pay mind to the centrist idea that all ideas should be respected and have equal value, we completely disregard what those beliefs actually are and what their tangible effects on our societies and individual lives end up being. If we were to take this idea of, it's just a different belief, you're intolerant, to its extreme, you could simply say you're a conscientious objector to the law and not be punished. Are you one of those Tumblr freaks who thinks pedophilia is a sexuality? Well, may as well respect different beliefs. Are you a part of the Children of God cult and think sexual abuse is actually totally reasonable? Well, that's just your religion, man. Are you someone who thinks the Bible is literal and we should stone gay people? Have fun! I hope you enjoy it. What I'm trying to say here is this idea is stupid. When your beliefs are actively harmful, then yes, I am intolerant to them, because as a whole, they create a less tolerant world. When you view people as subhuman for immutable traits, when you prioritize your own evangelical faith over women with ectopic pregnancies or victims of assault, when you prioritize a 2,000-year-old book over my right to my own body's appearance, you are directly harming people but see it as acceptable in order to further push your own values. Trans people are not making anyone, even other trans people, get gender-affirming care. Women who get abortions are not stopping you from having a child. Atheists, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, whatever, are not preventing you from being Christian by being open about having a different worldview. None of the things that conservatives are opposed to break the barrier of swinging their fist into someone else's face. They do not prevent any other person from doing something different. However, the policy and beliefs that exist on the conservative side are trying to force others to live in the very specific white Protestant Christian view of the world. To fall outside of that is to be wrong, broken, illegal, predatory, diseased, or dangerous. Not because these alternative beliefs or lives challenge their own rights in any way, but because they don't fit into the mold that they've created and expect every single person in the country to be pressed into. Okay, so I think I've established the political angle of it. Trump supporters refuse to see a difference in policy versus human rights, and have attempted to weaponize the platform of acceptance and tolerance created by the Democrats and the left in order to legitimize their hateful and discriminatory values as simply minor differences in beliefs. But I said we were going to talk about religion too, so what does religion have to do with that? While of course not every Trump supporter is Christian, around 81% of white evangelicals voted for Trump. He's consistently focused on them as his voter base for every election and his presidency in 2016. Essentially, even for non-Protestant Trump voters or non-white Trump voters, they will still be heavily influenced by the white evangelical culture and attitudes in these communities, considering that they are the central focus of his campaign and promises. Because of this, many of the attitudes, apologetics, and history of American evangelicalism have bled over into the talking points and arguments of Trump supporters regardless of their religious beliefs. Evangelicals are the poster child of Christian persecution complex. Despite abject favoring in government, being a large and wealthy population in the country, and their overwhelming influence on government, things like the War on Christmas, attempts to bring creationism into school and school choice advocacy, strong opposition to the civil rights movement done by painting themselves as victims, and the popularization of forced birth attitudes in Protestant communities are all brought to you by the evangelical movement. American evangelicals have a long history of painting themselves as oppressed when their privileges are afforded to everyone instead of just them. The popularization of anti-choice beliefs among Protestants was largely accomplished through the desegregation of Bob Jones University. I have a whole video on that I'll link below, but essentially a few key early members of the moral majority, before it even became a thing, had already been repeatedly trying and failing to get Protestants on board with anti-abortion advocacy. When segregation ended, a private Christian university, which had not only not allowed black students but also disallowed interracial relationships for current white students, was forced into desegregating. I talk more about Bob Jones University in that video, so I'll kinda leave it there with that history, but these early moral majority leaders used this as an opportunity for the white Protestants to see themselves as the victims. Not because they're white, but because they're Christian. They claimed the government had previously left them alone, but now this was just the start of the government trying to wipe out their way of life and their religion. That they were the victims in this. This obviously worked and continued to remain a theme for the moral majority and more broadly white evangelicals. In the years since then, we've seen a plethora of this type of belief and rhetoric among white Protestants. The entire God's Not Dead series is essentially a Christian persecution complex wet dream, with a Christian student being forced to write God is dead, and then being the heroic one who stands up and says no. And this was followed by sequels all being persecution porn legal dramas for Christians. The general public's introduction to the supposed War on Christmas started with the red Starbucks cup, when Starbucks used a red cup instead of a vaguely Christmas-themed one for their holiday drinks. This continues to this day, with organizations like PragerU arguing it's now bad to say Merry Christmas instead of Happy Holidays, and it's still parodied and discussed with the popular TV series The Boys having Vought put on Vought on Ice, where the characters sing about how they can't say Merry Christmas anymore.
Now you can say Merry Christmas, just Happy Holidays. Or maybe just seasons readings in a million different neutered ways.
Mind you, all of this because a corporation used a red cup instead of a previous cup that still had nothing to do with Jesus and was just shit like reindeer or snowmen or Christmas trees, cashiers saying Happy Holidays, and then them feeling victimized and thinking saying Merry Christmas in response is some kind of brave defiance. Or that occasionally there's vague holiday cards at Hallmark instead of only the Christmas ones. Essentially, not only does white evangelicalism have a hard-on for the concept of being persecuted themselves, but this feeling of oppression and hatred towards them is not due to their own beliefs being actively discouraged or attacked, but rather by allowing space for people who may hold different ideas than themselves or who may not fit into the mold that they've tried to cram everyone into since the movement's inception. Considering this is such a large part of their culture and beliefs, it's no wonder that in Trump's attempt to rally them as a primary voter base, he enabled and played into this persecution complex. Despite Trump's obvious biblical illiteracy and disregard for any understanding of really any denomination's ideas of Christian values, he nonetheless pays lip service to both the religion itself and the cultural norms and ideas that have formed over its history. There's the obvious here in that he's been aggressively anti-trans, anti-choice, and speaks frequently at evangelical events and conferences, but he also talks to them in the same way that their pastors, televangelists, and born-and-bred politicians do. He's not only stated that he'll, quote, fix America so good you'll never have to vote again, but his anti-immigration stances play nicely with the history of racism and xenophobia that has made the idea of American exceptionalism so deeply intertwined with Protestant Christianity. His disdain of the current education system is on par with that of both evangelical parents who homeschool their children for 24/7 indoctrination, as well as those who advocate for school choice and vouchers in order to get Christian education subsidized. and of course leaves plenty of space to abolish any standard curriculum that may be preventing creationism or Christianity from being taught in schools. Even him choosing Paula White as his spiritual advisor is essentially a compliment to their beliefs, as having an evangelical megachurch pastor whispering in his ear makes them feel like they're basically right there in the White House with him, especially with Paula White's own statements that when she's in the White House with Trump, God is in the White House. While not every Trump supporter is a white evangelical, a major portion of not only his actual policy, but also his attitudes and presentation have been crafted in a way that appeals to that specific culture. So of course, when someone decides to cut off a family member or be somewhat of a dick about someone else's support for Trump, they go straight into the same mindset that Dennis Prager does whenever he hears the words Happy Holidays. Even just existing in a way that doesn't fit their personal, religious, or political views is seen as oppression and as a threat. So when people take action against these harmful and destructive beliefs, that alarm bell sets off even further. It turns from hearing Happy Holidays into Francis Schaeffer saying a racist school-losing tax exemption will destroy their entire way of life and religion. I don't think all these people, even the evangelicals, are even completely aware of this, to be frank, but it's undoubtedly influenced their attitudes and arguments. Your right to swing your fist ends at the tip of my nose. You seeing me as subhuman is not a difference in belief. And no, I am not fucking tolerant of it. Thank you guys for watching. Hande.
We started pointing all our fingers at the people we decided